This show has been brought to you by Smith's Detection and the National Air Traffic Controllers Association.
My voice is the voice that guides you home safely each and every day.
24 hours a day, 365 days a year.
I am the voice of the safest and most efficient airspace in the world.
I have to be 100% of the time.
I am.
I am.
I am.
I am a professional air traffic controller.
Thank you for tuning in to One on One. I'm Stephanie Gupta. I'm joined in the studio today by Lee Kair, the Acting Chief of Operations for the Transportation Security Administration, who is making his television debut at AAAE. Lee replaces Gary Rassicot, who returned to the Coast Guard at the end of April. Welcome to AAAE, and thanks for being here, Lee.
It's my pleasure.
You've been at TSA really since its inception. Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I started off actually as active duty Air Force, and mainly focused on major weapon systems acquisition. And first joined TSA as the senior procurement executive, and was there for about a year and a half. And then Administrator Kip Hawley asked me to stand up a war room to work on all of his strategic initiatives. So that's when I really switched over into the operational side, and I got a great opportunity to work on many of the initial programs for TSA, including the Behavior Detection Officer Program, first efforts at explosive detection, really focusing more on explosive detection and so forth. Did that and really enjoyed it and got a good sense for the organization, and then really wanted to get a better sense of the operation. Was the Federal Security Director in Orlando, came up to be the Assistant Administrator for Security Operations for about 3 years, and then had a great opportunity to go over and be the Regional Director for Europe, Africa, and Middle East, stationed in Frankfurt, Germany. And just really received a whole new appreciation for what TSA does and how aviation security really works around the world. And then went down to be the Federal Security Director in Tampa. Been there for about 3 years, and now I'm coming back up to first off, started off actually as the Chief of Mission Support in an acting capacity, and then when Gary Rassicot left, I went over to take on the role as the Chief of Operations for about the last 2 months.
You've really held a whole gamut of jobs in TSA.
Been all over, yes.
Yes. In your acting position as COO, what are your top 3 priorities that you would like to focus on?
So really continuing the great efforts that particularly Gary put in place around Public Area Security Summit, looking at how you better partner and working in that ecosystem. We're very focused on the current mitigations that we have in place around personal electronic devices. That's been very much in the press, making sure that we're giving the best advice up to the department and working through the issues related to personal electronic devices. I'm also very focused on people, our TSOs, and how to be more efficient and effective. You know, when you look at the mission of TSA, it has 2 sides to it. It has effectiveness and efficiency. And there always seems to be a balance between the two, but sometimes we get a little bit farther on efficiency, sometimes we get a little farther on effectiveness, and it really can't just be this pendulum back and forth between the two. The next iteration of what we need to do is around doing better on both of those, being more efficient, because we can't grow our way out of the growth in the aviation sector, but we also really have to focus on our effectiveness. And a lot of that stems from the way that we've operated for a long time around requirements. And so one of the things that Gary put in place was this new division called ORCA, which focuses on agency-wide requirements, making sure we really understand what the needs are, go through an acquisition process, and then make sure at the tail end of that acquisition process or in the midterm of that we are meeting the needs of those requirements. So there's an awful lot going on around current threats, but also looking to the future and making sure that we're in alignment.
Well, you've touched on a lot of things right there. One of those that you mentioned was the public area. and TSA just released its public area framework. It was a collaborative effort with TSA, airports, airlines, the industry, a large number of people. Can you tell us what the next steps are for collaboration in the public area?
So before I get to that, I think it's important to talk about kind of the change in philosophy under Administrator Neffinger around instead of just being a regulator and a service provider for checkpoints and a regulator through inspections, he made the observation that we're really part of an ecosystem. And so when we started having problems with wait times and staffing shortages, he started that call every day, chaired by an assistant administrator, and that was the small nugget, that was the start of this collaboration with industry stakeholders, airlines, airports, with that call every day, making sure that we were all in alignment on what's going on. You shift from that over to the recognition that the public area is really a joint responsibility. TSA does not have primary jurisdiction to go out and to secure the public area. Local law enforcement's involved in that. We have Viper teams which assist under the flag of local law enforcement. You have airport operations which are involved. So a lot of different people engaged in that. So the thought is, how do we bring everybody together and make this a joint problem that we jointly solve? And instead of TSA regulating airports to do something and then us checking on compliance, how do we make it so that we jointly pool our assets and make it more effective? So a lot of work went into this. We've had several meetings with a lot of people, and we put out this framework that puts out the efforts that we want to undertake over the next year. And you'll notice it doesn't have a TSA seal on it. It's not signed by the COO. It's really a document of everyone who is involved in the Public Area Security Summit. So the next step is, now that that framework is out there, how do we actually start implementing some of the things that are the best practices that are out there? And I'll give you some examples. Down at DFW, they have an airport AOC, where they are now jointly manning that between law enforcement, airport operations, TSA, all in one building. That's been tough in the past because airports would be concerned, if we're in this joint room together, they're going to be looking for opportunities to write cases against us. So we don't want to be in the same room with us when we're doing airport operations. And TSA would say, well, you know, there's SSI here and they're not really cleared for all of this and we don't want to share this kind of information. So this new thought is, you know, the airports are cleared for SSI, and with what we're doing with outcome-focused compliance, and I'll talk about that in a minute, we shouldn't have that same concern about, you know, as soon as something is identified, it's a concern about immediately going to a case. So that's an example of something that came out of the Public Area Security Summit, which is a joint operations center where when something happens, if we jointly respond to it, it's much better than everybody trying to figure things out at the last minute because we're not jointly collaborating as we have in the past.
Right. Well, you mentioned outcome-focused compliance. It's a risk-based initiative that I believe TSA is planning on rolling out later this year. Can you update us on that effort?
So there's been a lot of work done by OSPI, our policy group, as well as our compliance group, on recasting the way that we do compliance. So in the past, there was always concern that you know, the ASP, Airport Security Program, is at the airport level is a regulatory document that TSA regulates against. It doesn't really represent the airport's security plan, right? So what we're trying to do is get past that of it being a regulatory document, and how do you jointly make sure that there's a better security outcome instead of ticking the mark on something being in compliance with a rule or regulation. So I think great work has gone into that. We're briefing FSDs and assistant federal security directors for inspection now and make sure everybody understands what the philosophy is. Been doing an awful lot of work with airport authorities to make sure the difference in philosophy that we're going down, and trying to get more toward jointly identifying vulnerabilities and jointly coming up with solutions instead of just being concerned about the ticket, if you will.
Okay. And is there a time frame when TSA will move to this officially?
I think we're still working through the programmatics on it, so I don't have a firm date on it, but I think it's sooner rather than later. I think industry and TSA both agree that this is the right approach to it, and so we'll be rolling it out. I don't know that it's going to be a one-day programmatic change where, as of this date, it's going to be official that we're going to cut over, as much as a philosophy of how we're going about doing things a little bit differently, and it's going to evolve over time as we learn how to do this. But the key takeaway is, how do you get to better security instead of a regulatory document where you have to be in compliance with something that may or may not make sense for your specific airport environment?
Okay. Switching gears a little bit, last spring we had some very lengthy wait times at a number of airports. TSA, the airports, airlines really worked together to try to resolve those issues while maintaining a high level of security. So far this year it appears to be working, but we have some budget constraints that you're facing that could make keeping the success with low wait times a challenge. What are you focusing on to keep those wait times low this summer?
So I think just expanding on what we did last year with that daily call is key, so that the stakeholders at each individual airport, for the top airports, there's that conversation every day, and it's chaired by an assistant administrator at TSA, so that we have that open dialogue every day to make sure that we're all on the same page, and when there's issues, they address it. We continue to have the AOC TSA headquarters is actually right outside the office of the administrator, where they are watching every day to make sure that when there's a problem, they are addressing it, including equipment problems. So in the past, if an x-ray went down, as an example, there was you'd put in a ticket and it would go through an electronic process and it would get to the maintenance people and they'd come over and they'd take care of it. With the AOC, they make a phone call and it's on a board where that's being worked at headquarters now to make sure that if you're really going to impact the capacity of a checkpoint, they get on it and they can get resources out there. We were successful last year, as you know, in getting a reprogramming to get some more resources out there, so that's been a tremendous help for us. So we have hired up. We recognize that there was a lot of pre-work that had to be done so that those people were ready to be deployed when the spring and summer rushes were hitting us. So the people are in place now. We've got the overtime in place to handle things. And one of the key enablers is dogs. We're in a much better position this year than we were last year on the number of canines, who really do provide a better layer of security. They are fantastic at explosive detection, so that's key for us. But they also, because they have gone through that screening with some other measures, we are able to expedite those passengers, so it gets a lot more people through the checkpoints quicker. We'll be up over 200 dogs by the 4th of July, where we weren't near that last year. So that's going to be a key enabler for us in this coming year.
Well, our airports certainly appreciate those additional dogs, as well as the focus on technology. Last question for you, Lee. On exit lanes, Congress has encouraged TSA to identify and procure and install exit lane technologies at airports. Can you tell us where TSA is on that, please?
Sure. So we have the Office of Requirements and Capabilities Analysis within the Chief Operating Officer organization that's, or also known as ORCA, that handles developing requirements and doing lists of approved technologies and so forth. To date, there are several airports that have this exit lane technology that is being approved locally. And some of those work better than others, and we'll continue to work with industry and the airport authorities to make sure that whatever they use has a very high level of security and also can handle throughput. So some of the issues with them are, for smaller airports, they work very well for low throughput areas, but don't work as well in a larger application. So there's a lot of nuance to these exit lane technologies, which can be difficult. And so we have this office that can assist airports in figuring out what works best for them. And then we also have local inspectors that will go out and make sure that the implementation works well for that local area. So we're certainly willing to and would like to partner with airports if they're looking at going down that path.
Great. I'm sure some airports will take you up on that.
Thank you.
It's really wonderful to have you in the studio today. Thank you for sharing all this information with our viewers. We appreciate that. Thanks for watching.